going to be teaching today on how to make a level and other like game design related tips, or game design and game development related tips. So let me just do like a brief introduction to myself, just to give a little bit of each of those. So I am an MIT junior, and I was raised in Florida. And as Kosi said, I am part of the MIT Game Design and Development Club here at MIT. In terms of like game experience, I've learned like a decent bit of game design like throughout high school, and game design and development and coding throughout high school and college. But beyond that, I've been playing games my entire life. So my favorite one is Overwatch, as you can see, and I like it for like several reasons, both like the art style and several points of design, which I'd be happy to talk about maybe afterward if people have questions. And my most played is Pokemon, the franchise that I follow the most, and some genres that I like, racing and turn-based strategy. And I've done a lot of stuff with retro games. Just because I grew up with really old consoles and older siblings, so I've got a decent like breadth of experience rather than just like more modern titles. Though we'll, for the most part, with this presentation, we'll stick to like 3 games, I think, really go into depth on. So let's move on. So making games. So you've been doing these kind of lecture presentations, or you've been going to these lectures or presentations all day, and they've been teaching you how to code, making you download stuff. Probably looks something like this. It's a bunch of code. And even I'm a computer science major, and I don't like code all the time. And in reality, that's not what game development looks like. This is just like one aspect. And the point of this presentation is to kind of show you those other aspects that might interest you about game design, and and learn some things that you might find useful when making your actual games. So yeah, there are more things to video games than game development. So here's a short list of the possible things you could do in game design. So the one you've probably interacted with most today is programming. But beyond that, you can just be an overall game designer. So just like determine the direction of the game, what type of genre, how basically anything that's related to how the player might play the game, a game designer deals with. And they might interact with the sound, the artists, and the programmers, and kind of to coalesce into something that's interesting and fun for the player. So the sound designer makes, they mix all the sound and music for the game, the sound effects for every level, the menus. Literally, we tend not to notice all the very tiny like sound features, but they do play a pretty large role in the experience when you're playing video games. There's the translator. Basically, like you will likely be making your games in English, but if you want other people around the world to be able to play your game, you need a translator. And then testing. So in order to make sure your games are actually like good at all, you probably want someone testing your games, including yourself. There's more to being a game tester than simply just playing a game. Normally they have like specific style of how their goal really is to break your game in whatever way possible. And they have like set plans in mind, and based on different genres, ways that your game might break based on like their understanding of how physics works and other like game programming elements, like easy points of breaking. So they always keep that in mind. Next is the artist and animation. So this is actually like heavily related to like the actual game design. As I'll talk about later in the presentation, art plays a major role in how the player perceives the game. Like a pretty simple example is if you're playing, let's say Mario, which I'll talk about a lot in this presentation, and I'm assuming most of you are familiar with that. If you're on like a regular Earth level with dirt and like sky, it's going to look relatively pleasant, and you're going to assume it might be easier. But if you're on like a lava stage with Bowser and his castle, you might assume it's more difficult, and that's due to like colors and animations, and lots of other things. And there's also animation, which is both relevant for 2D and 3D games. But yeah, I'll just move on to writer. If you're making like and you're making a narrative game, writing is very important, and might also determine how your game like design comes out. Like depending on how you want the story to flow, whether you want it to be linear or having separate different paths on how the story might develop, the writer plays an integral role in that. And even in not a narrative game, they play a major role in like the menus, making menus and any kind of UI or dialogue that happens in game. Just making sure that it's clear to the player, it's not misunderstood. So it's important. And then lastly, which the main one which we'll be talking through during this presentation is the level designer. So it might depend on like what genre you're playing, like the importance of the level designer, but since we'll be covering mostly platformers and puzzle games, because that's most likely what you will be making is like a platformer or puzzle game, because those are the easiest to make in a short time frame. A level designer is very important. So they make the level and play and kind of help the player grow as they progress through the game. So here, so you've seen all these roles, and now you're saying, "Oh, I want to be a game developer." So what do? Well, you make games. So there's a lot of routes to being a game developer. One of them is just like getting a degree in game development, which some more and more colleges are offering these days. You can go purely into software developing, do some internships at some like tech company or startup, and learn how to code, and as a byproduct, learn how to game develop or be a programmer. But definitely the most straightforward and really what a lot of people are looking at in the industry is whether you have any game making experience. So if you have experience making art, assets, programming, basically going through the steps of making games yourself or as a team, looks really good on a resume and is honestly like much more helpful than actually just being a software developer or only having one of these specific roles. Having experience in kind of the whole process is really what a lot of employers are looking for in this space. So now that you know you want to make a game, yeah, here, I have a link here which won't let me copy paste. Okay, I will. Well, let me just unshare a little bit because I need to access links and I didn't know it would let me not share links. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to send out a link in the chat to some game development tools we're about to get into in a second, and some jobs that you might be interested in. Yeah.
So while we're putting out links, I forgot to link this at the beginning of the workshop, but we need to fill out an attendance form. So, I mean, I told you this at workshop 1, 2, and 3, but if you go to, when you go to go.hackmit. Oh,
what are you saying again?
Oh, it's fine. I was talking to the participants about like attendance forms.
Okay. Yeah,
so yeah. So if you go to go.hackmit.org/bp-attendance, please fill out the form and say that you attended this workshop. Thank you. Okay, continue.
Yeah, here's the link that I was looking for. So here are some game design and development jobs that you might be interested in, and some longer descriptions, and more, and even more roles than I've talked about today. So you can look at some of those if you're interested. Yeah, so now that you know you want to make a game, here are some resources that you might want in order to help make your game. So the first things first, you want to know where you're making your game. So in in this hackathon, I believe you'll be using Phaser, but that's kind of a limited platform for developing games if you want to make it bigger in scope and scale. So most developers usually use one of these four. I can kind of go into detail on which one. So this is Godot. It's kind of a.
Oh, Dave, it was brought to our attention that do you want to be screen sharing right now?
Oh, am I not screen sharing? Oh, I forgot. Whoops.
Yeah, I think it accidentally broke out of it. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm sharing my screen. Let's see. Yeah, so one is Godot, basically kind of an elementary game engine, but a step up from Phaser. It's actually really easy for getting really easy for getting a game. Like if you have a basic idea and you want to test it out, Godot is a really good place to like test it out. Next is Game Maker Studio. I'm not super familiar with that, but it is something that is used on games. The biggest two are definitely Unity and Unreal for making like full-scale games. Unity is really user-friendly, or compared to Unreal, and what most like independent developers use and most hobbyists use to make their games, because it's usually like much more approachable. And then Unreal is usually what your bigger games are made. So if you ever played Red Dead Redemption, I think Grand Theft Auto was also made in Unreal. Actually, maybe not, but I know Red Dead Redemption 2 was made in Unreal. That was just made for like higher quality games and just massive like large developers. So I mean, I do not recommend that for like just starting out. So after you've chosen what game engine you might want to use, you want to, I would say like you want to pick, okay, between like your game engine and your art, you want to pick the genre, what genre and the idea for the general idea for the game. And once you've chosen that, you want to choose, you want to pick art, because the art is heavily related to what genre of game you picked. So for instance, like you wouldn't want to play, I would say GTA is, if a game like Grand Theft Auto is much less interesting in 2D. Take it from me who's played Grand Theft Auto 1 and 2, which is actually 2D. It's much less fun than some of the 3D games. So you want to like pick what art you're going to go with from the bat. And here are some resources. So the biggest one for pixel art for 2D games is Aseprite. I believe it's paid, but I think it's fairly cheap. It's like $20-something. That's definitely like the premier pixel art making tool. And then there's Blender, the orange round thing, which is usually used for 3D modeling and animation. That's also a very what most professionals use or for 3D modeling. And then if you want to work with vector graphics, like just vector art for maybe concept art, you can use Inkscape, Krita, and GIMP, which are out here along the bottom, which you can just use to draw or edit images. Kind of like, I believe GIMP is kind of similar to Adobe from Photoshop. So yeah, so you've chosen your art. Now we got to music and sounds, which is the other important element. So on the left here is Audacity. It's not really a music production software. It's more of you already have a piece of music and you want it, or a piece of sound, and you want to edit it, make it quieter, replace higher pitched, faster, just edit any sound editing, you want to use Audacity. And the next is FL Studio, which is a very professional music development software, like actual professionals do use this. It's quite expensive. So I think in the link I sent you before, I think the first link that I sent you, there's also links to Beatbox and VFX. So Beatbox is a free website where you can use to make pretty basic music, but at least it's music. And then VFX is for, you can actually make random sound effects. So, or you can make sound effects, and you can even generate random sound effects in case you don't have any kind of inspiration. So that's a pretty useful tool. And then lastly, if you want to make if you need pre-made assets or you don't really feel like making the art or music yourself, you can go to itch.io or Zapsplat. I recommend itch.io. So they just have a bunch of different sound, music, and pictures and pixel art, anything you might need for making a game. Okay, so now that we've gotten like the game development portion, like now that I've introduced you to some resources for making a game, now you want to go about making a game. So let's assume you've decided you want to make a platformer, right? Definitely the easiest or one of the easiest types of games to make. Now you want to design a first level. You want to design your first level in whatever and however way you want. So let's see. So you got to make the level. So how do you go about making a level? That's really the crux of this whole presentation. How do you go from just basic idea to actually making the level? And I'll talk more about like how the mechanics or the idea that you have kind of integrate to the level design. So as an example, I'll kind of use throughout the rest of the slides here. I'm going to use Mario because I think most people are familiar with like some of the blocks, the items and the interface in Mario. So the first method you'll see here is like randomly putting things down. You can see kind of an example of that in the bottom right. So randomly placing things down is a good way of just like getting a feel for some of the mechanics in the game. So you've decided like you have some game, you have some mechanic, and you want to kind of you've implemented the mechanic in the Unity or the game engine of your choice, and you want to just like play around with it. You want to just put some of those objects in the space and then play around with it in any way you can, and see if maybe something interesting pops up. More than likely, if you just put random things down, your level will be terrible. But it's a great way to get ideas. So, and then another method, which gives slightly better results, is slowly iterating step by step. So it's just say you design one part of the level. You say you place a platform, and you want to know if the character jumps, and then you want them to push something or pull something or basically do any action. Just step by step, planning out how you want the level to progress. You can also randomly choose a set of mechanics or restrictions. And I'll show that. I'll just show that on the slide here. So like say you're making Mario, you want to add, you don't know what to do or what to like base your level around. You can use maybe a randomizer, or you can use any kind of number generator for like any game, and it might give you some ideas. So like here, you want to use this is for Super Mario Maker 2. You want to use the Super Mario Bros. 3 theme. It's nighttime. You want to have bloopers and I think Bowser Jr. in your level, and you want to have fire flowers and pipes. So, and you can only use these items or something. And just giving yourself a restriction is a great way to kind of innovate. You're forced to innovate when you don't have all the tools, and it's actually less overwhelming if you have a lot of tools at your disposal, a lot of mechanics you have in mind. A lot of mechanics in your game, it's usually simpler to start out with only one or two, and then maybe expand if you want to like build in complexity. So I'll just go back. And the last style, which I will expound upon soon, is the Nintendo style. So this is kind of a misnomer because Nintendo's not the only person who does it. Most modern game developers do it, but Nintendo definitely did it first. And what the style is about is you want to, here, I'll just, let's see. Yeah, Nintendo style. There's really 3 tenets of the Nintendo style. And that's one, you want to introduce your mechanics. So this is all contained in an individual level. And it's also how the stages progress in difficulty throughout the game. So it's kind of working in 2 different kind of perpendicular, also kind of parallel axes of the progression of the game or the story of the game. So let's say, let's work in an individual level for now. You want to introduce your mechanics. So let's say it's Mario, a few things, you want to have a jump, you want to have Goombas, you want to have mushrooms and blocks. Those are kind of your main mechanics that you want to introduce. It's like the first level of the game. Then you want to complicate it. So now that the player knows about how Goombas and mushrooms work and bricks and coins work, you want to like put them in interesting combinations, which kind of forces the player to kind of familiarize with themselves with the physics of the game, the mechanics of the game, and how different objects might interact with each other. And then at the end of the level, you kind of want to have a culmination of everything that the player has learned throughout the level. You're kind of building on this complexity and their understanding of the knowledge, and then at the end you want to test it. So you might even throw in older mechanics from like prior levels, or just a very mechanically or mentally difficult challenge for the player that involves the mechanics that you've introduced throughout the rest of the level. Yeah, so let's go through the steps, like the three main aspects here. Yeah, so step one, introduce the mechanics. So first you want to choose what mechanics you want to use. In terms of actually choosing the mechanics, this is kind of backtracking a little bit, but it is Portal. I think I was gonna ask people in the chat what game this was, but I guess someone beat me to it. You want to pick out what mechanics you want to use. So what mechanics might be interesting in a game? Well, usually a good place to start is something called vivid verbs. And those are usually like they're verbs that do mean one thing, but can be used in several different ways. So I have some examples here: shoot, jump, grapple, punch, right? Mario has been around for almost 40 years, and his main verb is jump, right? You can jump at different heights, you can jump across different gaps, jump on different things, on buttons, on enemies. You can do a lot of different things with just one word, jump. And you want to really like seek out those kinds of interesting things, right? You don't want to limit yourself to a mechanic which seems interesting but really doesn't have that much use beyond maybe like a level or two. You really want to like stick to mechanics that have a lot of possibilities. And if you want to look at, I think it's best to look at other games for examples of good verbs that you might want to use. Most shooters have shoot. A lot of stealth games have a grapple. You can punch through objects. You make base your whole game on punching. There are several games about that. But now that you know what mechanics you want to introduce to the player, you want to teach the player that. So you want to force the player. The way to do that is by forcing the player to use the mechanics in their simplest form. So as Catherine in the chat mentioned, this is a picture of Portal, and you can see that there's on screen that the room is basically empty besides a button on the ground, kind of a circle, which the player will probably assume that's a door, especially because the large sign at the top saying down, and there's like a doorway. And then in the back, you can see a cube. It's called the companion cube in the game. And in the game Portal, the main mechanic is the portal gun. Basically, you can shoot a portal onto the wall, and you can shoot one end of the portal onto one wall, and another end of the portal onto another wall, and basically just teleport across a different area. In this level, they don't actually use it at all because they're introducing a different mechanic where you can use the portal gun to lift up objects, or you can lift up the companion cube. So that's one mechanic that you can pick up objects. And then the button is the second mechanic. And since there's not much in the room, the player will use basically the only thing that they can actually do, which is pick up the cube, and they'll put it somewhere, right? And really the only place that is of interest and that they might want to put it is on the button. So they put it on the button, and then immediately the door opens. So the player forms that association in their head buttons do things. In this case, they open the door when I put the companion cube on it. So let's see. The second is you want to complicate the mechanics. So at this point in the game, the player has kind of, in the case of Portal, they've interacted with the cube and the portal and lasers. You can shoot lasers through portals, and some of the cubes contain mirrors, which you can use to kind of reflect and bend the lasers. So you want to complicate now you know there are several functions of the cube, and you know these lasers, and now you can use them in tandem, right? So you're reflecting the lasers through the cubes and through the portals to kind of I don't know, to do something on this level. But now the player kind of knows that what they can do with these objects. So in your game that you might be designing, you want to take the core base mechanics that you've introduced in the level and combine them in some interesting ways. I will go through an example later, but you might want to say, for instance, let's just say Goombas and jumping in Mario. You know that when you jump on a Goomba, you destroy the Goomba, but not only do you destroy the Goomba, but you actually gain a slight jump boost. So you can kind of use that to reach places that you wouldn't otherwise. You also just want to make the obstacles harder. It would be very annoying if you just kept having mechanics and like alone in a room. It's not a very interesting game like before. So you want to complicate it both either mechanically and or mentally. So Portal is more of a puzzle game, so there's not much like mechanically difficult, but the puzzles do ramp up in difficulty, and you want to make sure that like it's kind of a smooth ramp up, and it follows how much the player is learning about the different mechanics and thinking about portals. But in Mario, the levels will increase in difficulty mechanically, right? There might be some reason you either have bullet bills or something fast moving on the screen, or like moving platforms where the player needs to precisely make inputs to do something, and those inputs can be hard to do, and you want to make sure that the speed and the precision with which they're making inputs kind of increases smoothly along with the player's development as they move through various levels, and in a single level as well. So now that your player has familiarized themselves with the mechanics, you want to give the players a chance to prove their competence. Now, I don't mean that in a sense like you want to prove that they're not stupid. I mean that in the sense where the player wants to feel like they've grown. Really, that's why we play a lot of games. That's actually, I mean, yeah, it's one of the main reasons we play games, is to feel like we've grown and we've gained competent at some skill. So you want to make sure that the player knows that, and the way to do that is by just giving them hard levels and having them conquer them. So how do you make those difficult levels? So you can mix those mechanics that you've introduced with that you've introduced in that level, and combine them with already mastered ones from previous levels. So if it's the first level, your final challenge is probably not that difficult. But like toward the later stages, once you've introduced several mechanics, not only are you continuing to remind the player of those older mechanics and making sure that they're still good at using them, but you're also testing that they understand how the mechanics that you've introduced might play with those other mechanics and might be relevant in the future, where they might be used. So a good way to help people build the mastery that they might need to conquer some of these later levels is by using collectibles or a currency to encourage risky behavior. And by risky behavior, I mean things that are more mechanically difficult, or where the risk of failure is a lot higher than if you just took a simpler path through the level. And in general, like, it makes objects more interesting because you give the players choice, right? You can either take the easier level, or you can, for people who maybe don't have that much time or like don't want to focus, or maybe they're just still not that good, but I mean they're enough to conquer the mastery level, but not like highly complicated maneuvers. It just makes the level more interesting overall. And for players who maybe already played the game or have mastered the mechanics like really well, it rewards them for that, for becoming skilled at the game. So yeah, I'm gonna transfer over to my iPad because I want to show like a demo of like how you might analyze a game, a level of a game. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, so this is Mario World 1-1. So basically it's like 1983 and your parents just bought you an NES and Super Mario Bros. The original. And you open it up, start a world, and this is what you see. Actually, you don't really see that. You can't see anything, right? You can move to the left or right. This is, in terms of like level analysis, this is interesting. This is analyzing a more introductory level. An analysis might be different depending on where you are in the game, but this is the very first level. So at the beginning, they see nothing. They have no idea how the game works. They have no idea who Mario is or how any of the physics works. So basically, when the player doesn't know what to do, they're probably gonna start just pressing buttons, right? They might go left. Especially on an NES because there's only 8 buttons on the original NES controller. They'll probably just hit a button and hope something happens because if there's something on screen, they don't know what to do. They might go left and nothing happens. They just bump into an invisible wall. Eventually, the player discovers that they might turn right. So kind of a game design element there is that you're not, by placing the player in a kind of a non-threatening environment, you kind of encourage them to be more playful because there's no risk of harm coming to them. It gives them time to experiment with the controls. So just having an empty space at the beginning is usually what you want. So yeah, they start moving right, they start seeing stuff. And then they get to this point. This is like one of the most important frames in all of gaming because it's like an amazing tutorial in how many is that? 7 blocks, a pipe, and a Goomba. It's one of the best tutorials in the game. So they've learned that moving right actually does something. So they're going to start moving to the right, and it's going to, right here, the game is going to try to, like I mentioned, it's going to force you to interact with the mechanics. So how is it going to do that? Well, the player's going to move right, and they're going to run smack dab into the Goomba and die. So immediately they know Goomba is a threat. So they're probably, at this point, they might have discovered that there's a different button, jumping. Or if they haven't, they're probably going to experiment a little bit more with the controller to see that you might jump. Like in earlier games, there's no real like manual or guide on on the control system. So they're probably going to experiment. Eventually, they discover that you can jump over the Goomba, right? But how will this actually like pan out? They'll end up. Okay, wait, I brought my tablet so I can like annotate this. Yeah, so they'll start running, and then they will likely just jump as soon as they get to the Goomba, which puts them right here, normal. And right there, they learn 2 things. Normally, that A, they can interact with blocks, and then B, interacting with these specifically these question mark blocks, it might bring up a coin, or in this case, it brings up a mushroom. Now, and the great thing about this, the bricks being so low, is that once they hit it, it will actually jettison the player right here on top of the Goomba, and it'll squash it, and then they'll defeat it and get some points in return. So immediately they learned that stepping on top of Goombas destroys them, and which is pretty relevant for like the entire game. So you want to, it's a great way of like ensuring that the player understands that rather than just running away assuming Goombas just mega death and there's no way to defeat them. So once the hitting the Goomba actually sets them down, and that allows for the mushroom to go to move to the right and bounce into this pipe. So immediately the player knows that these types of objects, the Goomba, the mushroom, can interact, can bounce. Basically, the way they work is bouncing off pipes. However, right, we know generally that mushroom is good, but the player, having just dealt with the Goomba, having died, will probably be more afraid of the mushroom. They'll see a moving object on the ground that's short and mushroom shaped, and they'll just assume it's a threat. So having these bricks extend out over here kind of forces them to stay on the ground, or they might even jump because they learned to kill the Goomba. The Goomba, they might actually attempt to jump on the mushroom, and immediately they will grow larger. Yeah, there's like a whole animation where Mario grows to two blocks high instead of one, and then immediately they learn that bigger is generally better, so they'll make that association. Okay, mushroom good, Goomba bad, and then now that they know how to jump, the player will likely move up. All right. So here now that you've kind of introduced a mechanic, you're kind of complicating it. You're actually introducing another mechanic here. You're complicating it by kind of forcing you to do one of two things. Either you're going to go into one of these pits and having to deal with several Goombas. So it's kind of building a mechanical skill by having to move quickly to dodge the kind of small space and you're kind of trapped with the Goomba. Or they might jump over. Now, if they just tap the button, if they just tap the button, they don't actually jump that high to make that jump. But the player might learn you can see by this kind of the escalating heights of the pipes here that by holding the button, you actually jump higher than you would before. So that's kind of an important point for making larger jumps in the future. For instance, in the future, they might, because they know you can jump higher, they might actually make that jump or make this jump on the first try. So on the right there, you can see an A. I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll skip that for now. Here, there's another question mark block, and they know this pops out another a 1-up. So now you've introduced them to regular mushrooms. Now you introduce them to a 1-up mushroom to give them extra life. They're much more likely to kind of run and catch it. But once you actually drop this the life, it'll actually start moving to the right. And then if you don't catch it in time, it'll fall down. So now you know that the objects can actually fall. They fall to gravity, and you knew that from before, but they can actually be destroyed, a place where you can't actually get it. And you might even have it so that the player might even fall directly into this pit because they think, oh, let me just chase after it. I can probably go down, and then they die and realize pits are bad. Okay. Right here, you're just introducing more jumps. So here's what I was mentioning earlier, where you're complicating things, or maybe you're kind of encouraging riskier behavior. So the player can do either one of two things. They could go up, or they could go this way. This way is generally easier. It gives you a mushroom, and you get a coin. You just have to jump over this pit. This one, even though there's not really a reward at the end of this, like a player who chooses to do this might feel a lot better about themselves and their competence just by being able to overcome that challenge. So here's two other mechanics. I don't know how much time I have left. Let's see. It's kind of want to get into other things, but yeah, it introduces star.
You're like another like 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, I might speed through, but yeah, so this is going to introduce a star. They will likely have interacted with some of the bricks at this point, but they haven't introduced one of the Koopa, the Koopa. So they will either run into the star and learn that stars make yourself immune and just run into it, or they will fall. They will try to land on one of these platforms and end up falling and might land on top of the Koopa, so that you learn that Koopas are you can jump on them and get their shell. So let's see. See, I will just skip this. Okay, yeah. And then lastly, the pipe. So the first time the player reaches this pipe, they will likely not actually go down into it, just because there's no real indication that it's there. Like the letter A is not there. Really? Yeah, this is just to like show that there's a pipe down. And then you go down, but they might actually discover it on accident. So it's interesting that you put it there. But in general, you probably don't want the player to run through it on the first try, because then they end up skipping most of the level. But it does add. But if they do find it, they might know that, oh, there's interesting things if I go down pipes, or they might give me some reward. So that's all I had of this analysis. Let's stop sharing. Yeah. Go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so here are some things to consider when you're making a game, making the level. You want to avoid having like visual monotony between levels. Even if the level is generally different, even if the mechanics of the level are different, if they look similar, they might end up blurring in the mind of the player. So for instance, great example of this is you ever played Minecraft, especially if you ever played Minecraft in the earlier, or like the alpha or beta, really early in its development. It was randomly generated. There were trees and plants, trees and grass, but basically everything in the world was trees and grass. So there wasn't much to the game, and just that alone might bore the player and make them stop playing. Mechanical monotony, you always want to be like kind of regularly introducing mechanics to the game, just so that after a point, they will probably feel very comfortable using the mechanics that they learn. So you want to keep kind of mixing it up with new mechanics and then mixing them together to make sure that keep the player always on their toes. And you also want to explore the full range of the game, a full range of the mechanics of the game. So that's why choosing interesting mechanics, or kind of versatile mechanics at the beginning of the game, is very useful, because you don't want to have a limited range of possibilities of what the game might do. If you feel like you're pretty limited by what you've chosen, you either want to add more or kind of scrap and restart and try to maybe use a more broad or general main mechanic for your game. And something else is pacing. Once the player is really good, you might want to like try to constantly throw super hard challenges at the player, but that's not always what you want. You want to make sure that between kind of the more difficult challenges, there's some time to rest. Either you can add a platform, or you can add a platform, or just maybe a different type of gameplay. So like rather than jumping or platforming, you might have some story beat or puzzles, save points, maybe some slight exploration, or even just pretty pictures. Pretty pictures are nice to look at. Usually it kind of eases the player. So you want to use art to your advantage. So this is why I mentioned toward the beginning of the presentation that the art you choose is very important. Very important, because it kind of it interacts with how the player might interact with the environment or interact with the game. So one element is signaling where the player should go. I couldn't find a good image of this, but if anyone has played the Last of Us on newer consoles, anything in yellow, it's kind of an action adventure game, and anything in yellow is generally tells the player where they should go in the world, because especially in 3D levels, 3D worlds, it's kind of difficult to know where you're going sometimes. So building that association, yellow is go there, then you kind of subtly giving help to the player while also respecting their intelligence. And building that association is kind of rather than having to build that association through like through the gameplay or like the analysis of the first stage of Mario, like I just mentioned, where is so the Goomba is good and Mushroom is bad. You can use stock signals. Generally, people know that spikes and lava are bad for your health. I would not recommend interacting with them. And hourglasses and clock usually mean something related to time. You might build a motif. A motif is just something that's repeated, and you repeat it throughout a level or a game, and that builds an association. The yellow telling where the player should go is an example of a motif. And all of these are examples of show, don't tell. That's really like the main thing you want to use. It's kind of similar in writing. You don't want to tell the person explicitly. You want to like show them and make them feel like they're growing as a player, or tell them information without putting letters on the screen, because letters are not fun to look at. An example here is Celeste. So this is another platformer where Celeste can press a button and actually dash while in midair, and you can tell that the dash is fast because there's a trail of some images as Celeste after Celeste does the dash. And I should have added an image, but usually the main character's hair is red, but in this image is blue because you've used your dash. Basically, it's telling the player that you have used your dash and you only have one dash while in midair. When you land, your hair will turn red again to indicate that you can dash. So that's just a good way of like telling the player information without putting words on the screen. So now that you've made,
one thing, just a heads up, we have to hard end at 6:12 because the closing ceremony is at 6:15.
Okay, 4 minutes. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that you've made your game, you want to test it, right? So you may think, oh, your game is perfect. Like I've tested it, everything works out. But then you might have a friend or a parent play your game and they can't get past the first level because something was unclear, or maybe it was too hard. A lot of those things can be hard to tell, especially when you've been playing your game for several months. You might be a master at it, so it's really hard to look at a game from the perspective of a player who's never played it. So you want to test it to make sure that you don't have any of those kinds of pitfalls or even bugs in your game. And here's the kind of the last slide here. But beyond the tutorial, beyond the tutorial and throughout the entirety of the game, you'd want to continue to complicate and build mechanics. Yeah, build mechanics. And if you're confused on, or you don't know what mechanics to include, you can always play other games for inspiration. There are lots of different types of games out there. You might want to put random things in your levels to see if anything interesting happens. It might make the level terrible, which is quite likely, but it also might make it very interesting, or might add an interesting twist or challenge for the player. And then lastly, you want to iterate rapidly. So you might want to try to make the perfect game right off the bat, perfect level. Usually it doesn't work out that well. You want to just make a level, test it out. If it doesn't work, either change it or scrap it. And you want to make sure that's quickly, because you can kind of build more and more levels and test. And usually they end up being better as you progress through the iteration process. Yeah. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So yeah, there's not really time for questions, but if you do have questions, just ask in the game dev channel of the Blueprint Discord, and either we can get to, or I don't think David's on the Discord yet, but if he is willing to answer questions about game dev, I don't know if you want to do that, or
Yeah, I can answer questions. That's fine.
Yeah, but so right now, right after this call, you should get onto the closing ceremony, which should have been published in the Discord. Uh, like everything was kind of pushed back a little bit, so everything's much closer than it usually be. But yeah, thank you, David, so much. This was so like a very cool talk on like game design and level design, and like even though we covered like more of the like how to make games, we kind of really didn't talk about like what makes a game good. And I think this is like a good way to round it up. So yeah, thank you. But yeah, so oh wait, people are already leaving. Okay, I should have posted this, but like if you didn't fill out BP attendance, please fill it out. It's go.hackmit.org/BP-attendance. I posted in the chat. Like we need to keep attendance for these workshops. So yeah. Other than that, I think I will end the meeting here. All right, thank y'all. It's been a super long day doing workshops and learning game development, but it was super fun. I had fun, and I hope all you guys did too. So yeah. Bye. I'm in the meeting.
Thank you.